So this first part, I'm doing this just so you can see what the kind of instructions we give our panelists. In fact, we're going to videotape this part like we've been doing the other presentations. Once I'm done with the panel briefing, we're going to cut the tape, and we're going to discuss these proposals that you've seen. These proposals were volunteered by some of our PIs, people who we fund, in a very wonderful thing, because they're letting themselves hang out. Not only are they showing you the successful proposals like the other people did, but they're also going to show you their unsuccessful ones. So you'll be able to see a first one that was not funded and one that was funded. Now, frankly, I would have preferred it if we didn't tell you which was which, because then maybe you could have tried your chops to see if you could figure it out, although I think it's pretty obvious seeing these. I can't tell you who they are, who the PIs are, but they're very good people. They're very well-known people. In fact, I know both of them quite well. And so I'm just delighted they decided to do this. We also chose proposals that I think are easier to grasp. They aren't necessarily super technical. I mean, they are technical, but they aren't like, say, doubly homomorphic encryption, which maybe would be harder for a general audience to, or broad audience to understand. So let's start, though, with the panel briefing. First, I need to give you a disclaimer. I'm a division director, right? I'm not a program director. That means I'm one level up from division directors. It doesn't mean I'm better than them. It just means that I have to try to control them, which is a challenge. It also means that I don't make, well, actually, okay, let me change that. I don't run panels, right? They run panels and they report into me, and then we end up working on the decisions. So this is my first panel briefing. This is a treat for me to do. I've been, of course, a reviewer many, many times, and I've been briefed just like this, but I've never got a chance to brief a panel before, so thank you for letting me do this. So this briefing is pretty much the briefing that we're going to use for our career panels that we'll be holding in the late summer, early fall. So first, let me tell you a little bit about CISE so you can understand what's going on. Indeed, you should think of this as being a CSR panel, because the first proposal, the one we'll spend most of our time on, came to the program CSR. CISE is, you can think of CISE as being like a college at a university level that contains 3 departments, okay? And each department is doing different things, just like EE departments and CS departments and OR departments do different things. So the 3 departments we have in NSF, they're called divisions, are CCF, CNS, and IAS. CCF is Computing and Communications Foundations. These are the people that do the low-level important things. These are where many of the Turing Awards are, Fields Medals, kinds of things. They do algorithms. They do the foundations of hardware and software. They do the foundations, communication theory, things like that. Indeed, their core programs are algorithmic foundations, communication information foundations, and software and hardware foundations. These are the 3 things they do. The person who runs this is Suzanne Hambrush from Purdue University. We are CNS, Computer Network Systems. So we build on foundations. We provide the systems level abstractions of what's going on. We have 2 main core programs in my division. We have computer systems research. That's sort of our focus here. This is everything with computer systems, operating systems, wearable computing, pervasive computing, embedded systems. Basically, anything you can put into a computer systems problem, we do it. CSR I view as being the mother program of CISE. We get many of the most interesting off-the-wall ideas coming into this program, and that's its strength. The other core program in my division is Networking Technology and Systems, or NETS. The second proposal that you see is actually from NETS, and this one is doing everything in networking. So we cover everything from wireless, spectrum sharing, wired networks, optical networks, biologically inspired networks, chemical networks, underwater networks, all that kind of thing is done under NETS. The next level up is IIS, Information Intelligence Systems. The head of this is Howard Walkler from Carnegie Mellon University. And this is where people enter the equation in a fundamental way. So this is where we have human-centered computing, information integration informatics, robust intelligence. They talk about things like how do we augment people, both physically and computationally? How can we put people into everything we're doing in terms of informatics? These 3 divisions, this comprises all of CISE. At the top is are, you can think of him as a dean. His name is Farnham Jahanian. He's from the University of Michigan. And he's called an assistant director because he assists the director of NSF. The director of NSF is a fellow named Subra Suresh, Dr. Suresh. He is a former dean of engineering from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And his boss is the president. We have no cabinet secretary above us. So NSF is a wonderful organization because we're really shallow. We're also quite visible because of that. And believe it or not, we're also a small organization because our budget is under $10 billion a year. It's about 7 or 6 something. And so we're a small, flexible organization with a fair amount of impact. The way we run our core programs is we divide things into 3 categories. We call them, innovatively enough, small, medium, and large. Small projects have budgets up to $500,000, and they have a duration up to 3 years, and the deadline for them is mid-December. This is where we get most of our proposals, hundreds of them. And this is where many people compete. This is a place, if you have an idea that is you and a student, this would be a great place to send your idea. You can do collaborative, you can do with more students, but you're going to run out of money pretty fast. But there's a lot of flexibility in this. Medium projects are over $5 million, but up to $1.2 million, and they can go up to 4 years. The deadline for that is August. I think we've moved that to September. I think the slide is out of date. These are more likely to be collaborative, but they don't need to be. This is actually, I think, the sweet spot in NSF. If you're trying to write a proposal and you want to try to maximize your bang for the buck, try to do a medium. It's very competitive, but we get relatively few medium proposals. And so our funding rate is actually somewhat higher in it. So if you can find a way to couch your work so that it fits under a 4-year program and will stand up to this program, this is a good place to come. Yes?
I got a mixed suggestions. One person I talked to in NSF and she suggested me that, okay, based on what you have done, it is a good reason to try a medium. But when I talked to another person, yes, that based on your level of being an assistant professor, it's risky.
So the question was, can you submit a proposal to a medium if you're an assistant professor? The answer is absolutely. Happens all the time, and we fund them. So ignore that person, right? If on the other hand, yeah. One can always submit. And not only that, they get funded. They absolutely get funded. They get funded. Assistant professors, no, it happens. It happens. Again, it's our somewhat undersubscribed. So, and you can't take, don't take your small idea and pump it up and send it into a medium. That's not going to succeed. You really have to have something that has the scope of a medium that warrants a 4 years. But don't be afraid to submit to it.
Does the medium require more previous work to be demonstrated for you to consider it, versus small might take a risk or something?
Well, right. So the question is, do you have to have more grounding to be able to get a medium proposal? That is, do you need to have more demonstration you're going to succeed? Well, it is true that giving you $1.2 million, NSF has taken a larger gamble on you than if we only give you $500,000. And people think of that. On the other hand, if you think your idea is good and you can defend it, absolutely send it. And realize that sometimes what we will do is we will rescope you. So I have certainly seen the case where proposals come in for a $1.2 million, and the panel says, there's about 3 years of really good work in here, and it gets rescoped. We do that. We do that.
There's a preference to go for collaborative initiative.
Mediums are better usually. I mean, if it's collaborative, you're probably already thinking about a medium because otherwise the money runs out really fast, right? Smalls are small. The last kind of project are large projects. These go up to 5 years, and they're up to $3 million. These are highly competitive, as you can imagine. We may get a total of a couple of dozen of these, and we may fund 2 of them. So these are, it depends on the year and what comes in, of course, but these are highly competitive. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. My guess is, for a large, it is going to be collaborative. And so you need to have a good team. And you need to have a good idea of what you're trying to do. That's a lot of money, a lot of science you can be done. On the other hand, I think larges are where some of the best science can be done because you are doing collaborations, you're bringing people forward. So if you have an idea and you want to go for a large, get the right people to partner with you, talk with program officers, give it some thought. It is a shot. Okay. Then we have careers, and that's really what we've been focusing on here. Okay. So panel activities and outcomes. What is a panel? A panel, which we're sort of simulating here, has the main purpose of providing feedback to program directors. It's only feedback. You do not really get to decide what gets funded. You just get advice. And the advice is listened to very carefully because this is the gold standard. This is what makes NSF stand out as one of the strongest institutions in the United States in funding research. Indeed, one of the strongest institutions in the world. Last week, we had an international summit of all these different funding agencies across the world, and they were there on our merit review process. So we use this as advice. And of course, we also use it as providing feedback to the investigators. When the reviews that come back and the panel summaries are there to help guide the researchers to do better research, even if they're funded. That's the main goal of the panel. Now, we have what we call evaluation criteria, and there are two of them, intellectual merit and broader impact. In intellectual merit, the things you should be considering are the importance of the proposed activity. Obviously, this should be advancing knowledge, advancing science, advancing understanding. And it can be both within a single field or across fields, right? So it is certainly the case that NSF is a bottom-up driven society. We respond to the science. So we aren't a mission agency. We don't say that you have to work in this area. We certainly have ways we evaluate things, but we are trying to be responsive to the way science is going as long as it has an impact. This is where we look for creativity and originality, for cleverness, for doing things differently. Where in this evaluation for intellectual merit, we care about the significance of the expected contributions. Is this something we should be doing, we should be spending money on? We also worry about the qualifications of the PI team. Can they do this? So you talk about prior work. Prior work really comes into this issue of qualifications. Can you really do what you say you're going to do? This isn't necessarily a track record in the specific field. You may have evidence in another field, but you're really looking for someone who can do the research, who's probably has a chance. Now, of course, not all research is successful. NSF doesn't expect all research to be successful, but they don't want to throw money away either. And so NSF they're quite willing to take risks. As a panelist, you should be allowing risk as long as you have an idea that there is a possibility of a good outcome. An issue here is adequate effort. This issue has come up. That is, can the PI actually put in the time to do this? And this is always an important issue. When a PI submits their proposal, you don't see them here because you haven't seen the whole proposal. There will be a list of their current and prior funding, and you should be checking their hours. See if they're proposing to work much more than they possibly can given their academic and other responsibilities. You have to see if they can do it. And if it looks like they can't, they better talk about it in their proposal. It's an issue. Yes?
Oftentimes when we get a review comments, we may not be so convinced, but NSF, frankly, it is a very fair process. We got a whole IT when we read the reviews. But there are cases that you don't feel that much being counted with review. So is that, tendency for NSF to go take something like NIH is doing, hold a study session and release, make public the names of the people on the study session. So when they put comments and they have to defend their comments. But for NSF, when you see review comments, some of them you really do not agree with them. But nobody, they are not responsible for whatever they put on your
As a person who's had NSF proposals turned down, I understand what you're saying. But in fact, anonymity of reviews is an important foundation of the review process. So we have talked about trying to have some information that comes out, but it's, for example, even just thanking people for serving on reviews to get feedback to show you that we're actually getting great people reviewing these proposals, which we are. But even that is, it's basically NSF policy. But same, I know conferences struggle with this as well. I know we keep it anonymous. The answer to that point is you should absolutely talk with the program officer if you have reviews, you have any questions, and they will help you walk through it. So let me take one step down this dark path. If you get a proposal and you think it has been unfairly reviewed, you talk with the program officer. If you think that that person has not answered your questions correctly, you talk with the division director. If you still think it hasn't been answered correctly, you can do what's called a reconsideration. It's a formal process. It's defined, if you Google NSF reconsideration, you'll find out how it's done. What they're going to do is they're not going to get new reviews. They're instead going to, what we're going to do, is ensure that we got the right people on, that we followed the right process. I've been involved in a few reconsiderations. They don't happen that often, but we follow good processes. So, okay, the last question about effort, access to necessary resources. This is clearly important. As you're looking at this in terms of intellectual merit, do they have the resources to do the research as well? Do they have access to the information they need? Now, broader impact is the other review criterion. And broader impact is quite important. I forget who is the person, I don't know if he's in this group, who said that, yeah, you were the one. And you said you didn't believe it, but you said that education was I forget the exact words, but they were beautiful. Doesn't matter what you said, but they were beautiful. Yeah. So broader impact is actually something we take seriously. And it's something that we ask you as panelists to comment on in all your views, in your discussion, and in the summary. It's something that we take quite seriously. There are many ways that broader impact can take place. The thing that most of us think about are teaching courses, writing papers, going to conferences. That, of course, is spreading the information around. That's broader impact. But also reaching down into K-12, that's a fine kind of broader impact. Involving groups that are not normally or underrepresented in STEM, that's a fine kind of broader impact. Contributions for research and education is all fine. Starting a company, getting your products out somewhere, or ideas out into products, those are all broader impact. There are things that are doing more than just to the science. And this is important. I always advise my panelists, and I always come in and say hi to the panelists. I make the point that in broader impact, this is not the place where you're necessarily looking for creativity. It's fine to be creative, but the most important thing is, can they do it? Are they proposing to do something that's actionable? And that's what I think you should be looking at in terms of broader impact. Okay, one of the issues that comes up quite often is high risk, high reward. Should we be funding high risk, high reward proposals? And the answer is, well, yeah, we should, right? That sounds right. This comes back partially because people who've had their proposals reviewed, they say, wait a minute, I didn't get funded because they thought it was too much of a high-risk proposal. That's because they get comments saying that this person really can't do the work, or it's unlikely they can. And there's a lot of sociology that goes into this. A panel process can crush creativity if the panel ends up going down that direction. It's part of the job of the program officer to help you pass that, but I want to encourage you, when you review proposals, keep that in mind, that you're reviewing research. You're trying to move the field forward, and you should always be trading off risk for reward. In fact, what we want to do is fund high reward proposals, right? And if we could fund low risk, high reward, well, that's really good. But there's always going to be some kind of risk that's going to be involved, and do that trade-off in your evaluation. We're looking for exciting and bold vision, articulation of challenging problems, some preliminary work to show that a brand new approach is usable, comparisons with previous work. You can't say you're going to do something new if you don't know what the old is, and having some evaluation plan to show what you're doing has an impact or that you're making progress. Evaluation is a human process, and their bias always comes into this. When you're evaluating a proposal, you may have biases that you don't even know you have. And some may be against or towards groups that are underrepresented. Some may be towards areas which are underrepresented. Some may be towards approaches or universities or missions. And so you really have to work hard to keep these biases out of your argument. You need to be looking at the research. This is hard to do. It's always a problem when you're doing review. So just keep that in mind. You're looking at the research. An aspect of this I like to say is, as most of your computer scientists, computer engineers, right? You are used to debugging, right? You debug your research, you debug programs, you debug your students' projects. You are not debugging these proposals, right? You're evaluating them. Do not say, is this what I would do? Instead say, is this good research? Okay? Now, the grades you're going to be giving are going to be excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor. And even though I've given you 5 categories, I know that some of you are going to want to put things in the boundary, good/fair, right? Because you always have these divisions. These are subjective ratings that you're going to use, right? I can't give you an absolute metric of what is a good versus what is a very good. But what you write should at least make some sense with respect to what letters you have in this thing, what you say. As a division director, going to the division director side, I read every review that gets done for all our proposals and the panel summaries. And I have seen people give glowing reviews to a paper or to a proposal and rate it a good. I have no idea what it would take for that person to do an excellent. Perhaps Turing Award win, perhaps something from their mother, I don't know. And so when you're reviewing these things, be sure that your reviews are consistent with your rating, with what is going on. Now, the program director is going to be looking at this. There's going to be some adjustment, but it's your responsibility to be honest. You should try to balance them out. Now, of course, maybe you got all the bad papers in the panel, or all proposals in the panel. That can happen. Yes?
Will you get a spectrum ratings like B, V, C, F, F? What do you think?
I mean, what, as a program officer, what happens when you get a V, V, G, F, F? You think that's a pretty interesting proposal. So that can happen for many, many reasons, right? There's no good diagnostics. It means that people disagree. That's what it means. And it could be that the people who gave it very good had no idea what the field was about, and the ones who gave it fair knew a lot about it. Or it could be that the people who gave it very good knew that there was something nuanced in there and could sort through all the smoke to see what it was. Or it could be based on many different things. Those proposals get discussed. And you try to resolve it in the panel summary. Now, the panel summary is going to be the summary recommendation. For every proposal, there will be someone who's charged to write the panel summary. This is the contents of all the discussion that take place. And the panel summary is going to give that proposal one of 4 ratings: highly competitive, competitive, low competitive, or not competitive. You heard Mohammed talk about this earlier today. Not competitive means that the PI is discouraged from resubmitting. Don't send this back again. Versus highly competitive, saying you should fund this at all costs. Competitive means it's definitely fundable. Maybe some needs work, but maybe it's still highly fundable. Low competitive means that there's some really good ideas in here, but it still needs some work. And this is what the panel is recommending the actions take place. Now, it is true that the program officer will take this into account, and we have funded LC proposals because the ideas have been good. And we have not funded HC proposals because there may have been other flaws that didn't come out in the panel summary. But when that happens, we try to give as much information to the PI so they can move forward. Again, the panel recommendation is based on the insights gained during our discussion. So if you were the panel, if you are the scribe, listen carefully to the discussion, record the information that goes on. This is extremely important for the PI to get back to understand what took place. And if there was some issues that did not get resolved, some disagreement, the reason you had the VVF was due to fundamental disagreements, put that in here so it's visible. So, panel summary, this is more pretty much what I said. This is writing what happens in the panel discussion. This is just like reviews. What you have in here should be constructive, and it should be informative, it should be non-inflammatory. This is like ABCs, but occasionally you get people get very incensed, and it has to be good. I also recommend people that when we read proposals, we often do a triage. There are those that we think are great and we're going to fund, and those that we think are NC and they're just not going to be funded. And then there are those in the middle. And quite often, those in the middle end up getting fairly short comments because they want to move on to the others. That's exactly the wrong thing to do. Remember that the PI is going to take these comments and use them to modify his or her proposal. So use the panel summary to give as much detail about that as possible to guide them. Otherwise, they may just resubmit a proposal with a few changes and it won't get funded again. And we've just wasted everybody's time. At this level, when you're writing the panel summary, you should ignore all letters of endorsement, except for those from organizations that are contributing things that will help make the research go forward. Right? You're evaluating the research, not whether this person is a good person or not. Confidentiality. This process is highly confidential. Do not take proposals and show them to your friends. Do not go and tell people, hey, I reviewed this proposal and you know, this is what happened. Do not go and tell the person, hey, I reviewed your proposal. This is a confidential process. You can't even tell people that you were serving on a particular panel because then it would leak out that you were served on that panel. You can say that you've served on panels, that's a perfectly fine thing to do. But probably you shouldn't say what day it was because sometimes there's only one panel being held in CISE, and that will then indicate what you're doing. So if you have on your webpage saying, I'm off at NSF, serving on a panel, maybe you shouldn't say that. Just say, I'm off in Washington, D.C. looking at the cherry blossoms or something like that. As I say, the panel recommendations are confidential. Proposals are not in the public domain. I can tell you that before my time there, someone had taken proposals they had seen and posted them. That's really, really bad. Treat these proposals just like you treat papers when you're reviewing them. They're confidential. And again, recall that panels are making recommendations, not decisions. They're vital, important recommendations, but they're not the final decisions. So what that means is, if you were in a panel and you said, wow, this is an HC paper and it's my friend, you can't go and say, guess what I know, because you don't know. By the way, if you're a friend, you ought to think about whether you should be reviewing that proposal. There are conflicts of interest that take place. Indeed, the conflict of interest rules in NSF are the most serious rules that we have. For program officers, this is how you can get fired or go to jail. We take this very seriously. So there are two kinds of conflicts. There are institutional and personal ones. Institutional ones are your current or previous employment, up to 12 months ago, and places for which you're seeking employment. So if you just graduated from Stanford University and you're currently employed at MIT and you're talking to Harvard, you now have 3 conflicts of interest if they're within that window. Any place that has given you an award, honorarium, or paid for you to travel up to 12 months, that's a conflict of interest. So this is a serious one. If you happened, for example, to have been asked to go to Duke University to give a talk about your research, and they've paid you to do that, you have a conflict of interest with Duke for 1 year. If you're an officer or a governing board, then you have a conflict. For example, if you are an editor for an IEEE journal, then you have a conflict with IEEE. And any financial interest that you hold, these are institutional as well. So for example, I'm not sure exactly what they'd be, but if you had been donating a lot of money to a museum that had a proposal coming in, talk to your program officer. Personal ones are if you've co-authored a paper with someone up to 48 months ago, 4 years. For them, you have that conflict of interest until then. If you've co-edited a journal or proceedings with them up to 2 years. If they're your PhD advisor or your student, that's a lifelong one. You'll always have a conflict with them. Family member or close friend, another conflict of interest. So it depends on how close that friend is. For example, a friend of mine is Fred Schneider at Cornell University. I have written papers with him in the past. It certainly has been 4 years since we've written a paper together, and I have a conflict of interest with him because I really care about what he's doing. And I do not trust myself to be fair, impartial with him, and even if I were, I don't think I could prove it to you. So that's a conflict. If you have a conflict, you cannot participate in the discussion on that proposal. You have to leave the room. And so if you go to NSF and you see people sitting out there reading their email on a couch, it's a conflict of interest. This also holds for the program officer. If they have a conflict in the panel, they'll leave and someone else will come in and do it. Yes? What's again?
For conferences, it's only the members of the technical program committee that defines conflict of interest, or other organizational positions as well?
Oh, so like if you were a general chair, for example?
Or let's say publications chair, or PhD forum chair, or whatever they might have.
That's a good question. That would be something I would ask the program officer at the time. I've seen it go one way or the other. So I would certainly say it's a conflict.
But if you're in the technical program committee,
That's a conflict.
that's a conflict.
Yeah. So if you have any conflicts, you should discuss them early. Indeed, when you're asked to serve on a panel and you're given your proposals, if you have a conflict, let the program officer know right away so they can reassign that to someone else. Don't spring it on them when you show up at the panel. When you can, you absolutely have to do it by that time, but the earlier the better. Any questions? So do you think you understand the review process? Understand the conflicts? What it is you're supposed to be doing? Okay. So let's take a look at some proposals.